brought you over to this patch of scrubby weeds, and one thing you'll notice that's different about this area is that there's many different kinds of plants growing here. So it's closer to something like the wild where diversity is a key factor. That very same weed that I just showed you here in the wild has produced a seed capsule. I'm actually going to try and remove the seed capsule and show you the seeds inside. It's dry. Inside there's an abundance of small hard seeds. And so from one plant you've got dozens of seeds. Each of these seeds contains the genetic information capable of reproducing an entire adult plant, which can then go on to produce many seeds. So from one plant comes the possibility of reproduction in abundance. And that's actually an idea that is really at the center of the concept of evolution. Each individual is capable of reproducing in excess of the resources that are available for survival. And because any of those adaptations that lead a slight advantage to an individual means that that individual will go on to produce more of its own seeds, which will make up a greater percentage of the population in the future. You don't have to go far, really, to find a plant that's capable of movement. We usually think of them as being rooted in the ground and living their lives in relative stability. But if you look carefully at this thistle, you'll see that part of the plant, at least, is getting ready for a journey. If you look closely at this fluff, you'll see the seeds. Each one has its own tiny little parachute. Given a gentle breeze, these seeds are capable of really traveling for quite a distance. And there we go. Just let those go. If you notice, as those seeds travel past this apple tree, you'll see another strategy that plants will employ to get around, to move. And this is a fruit, and most of you are familiar with apples as delicious parts of your complete breakfast. What humans are not accustomed to doing, but other animals are, is actually eating the entire apple. And that's good for the plant for one main reason, and that is that inside of the fruit, the plant has stored seeds that get carried along on the journey with whatever herbivore is hasty enough to eat the entire apple. So this one apple contains 5 seeds. Each seed is capable of producing a whole apple tree, and each apple tree, as you can see, can produce hundreds of apples in one season. So there you have another example of a living thing that's capable of reproducing in excess, really in excess of the resources that are available. And these are really good apples. Tart, crispy, just enough sugar and starch really to provide the animal with the energy it needs to move around, and in the process carrying along the seeds that will then provide the tree with an opportunity to continue surviving and growing. Here's an example of insects that are taking advantage of the tree. These insects are too small to carry the seeds, but they are capable of benefiting from the nutrients that are found in the apple itself. And if you were a tree, you would want to find out ways to prevent your fruits from being eaten by animals that aren't going to carry your seeds. So these ants are enjoying the sugars that are found in the fruit, but their bodies are so small they're really not capable of ingesting the whole fruit, and so the tree isn't really benefiting from the relationship with the ants, like it would from a relationship with a bear or a deer or any other animal that's capable of consuming a whole apple. If you look out over this beautiful hayfield, one thing you'll notice is that you've got some plants that are real indicators of this season. It's late summer, early fall, and the goldenrod is out in full bloom. There's a common misunderstanding about goldenrod that if you just think a little bit about how the plant works can be pretty easily dispelled. So let's take a look at the goldenrod a little bit closer, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. The goldenrod's flower is a hub of activity. As you can see, there's a honeybee visiting this flower. The bee is there to collect pollen and nectar, 2 food sources provided by the flower that the bee is going to use to feed its hive. And the beautiful yellow color of the flower is beautiful to our eyes, but it's also visible to the bee. And so it serves as a marker for food for a busy bee that's doing its job. If you look carefully at the legs of the bee, you'll notice that it's got some yellow patches, actually little sacs full of the goldenrod's pollen. And that pollen is very sticky. It has to be sticky because its main purpose is to pollinate other flowers, and that's a way that the goldenrod actually increases its chances of survival in future generations. By pollinating other flowers, the plant is actually engaged in a sexual relationship with another plant. And during the cellular processes that follow pollination, the plant will produce seeds that are distinct from either parent plant. And those seeds will potentially have a better chance of surviving in changing environments in the future. So the goldenrod is using its bright, showy beauty to attract a pollinator. The pollen is sticking to the pollinator, being carried to a neighboring flower, and in that way the plant is increasing its odds of survival in the future. But the myth that I want to try and dispel today is the myth that people are actually allergic to goldenrod pollen. It's a myth that my own father succumbed to and always claimed that in this time of year when the goldenrod was blooming, his allergies were because of the goldenrod. But if you think about how a goldenrod flower moves its pollen around, it does so by sticking to a honeybee. So the pollen grains are actually heavy and sticky. They don't actually go into the air where they might encounter a human nose and cause an allergic reaction. But it's an understandable misconception because, oh hey guys, you can see some wildlife in the background, some primates. But this time of year, goldenrod is not the only flower that's out and about. What you're more likely to be allergic to is probably found close by to goldenrod, and that is ragweed. If you look closely in this patch of goldenrod, you'll see something maybe a little bit out of the ordinary. This goldenrod stalk here is exhibiting a curious phenomenon, which is it has growing something that looks quite a lot like a fruit, like an apple, for example. But in reality, it's a little bit more sinister. This is not something that the plant is producing on its own. As a matter of fact, the closest sort of metaphor for this would be cancer, because what's going on here is unchecked growth. And the reason for that sort of abnormal growth can be discovered if you just carefully cut inside of it. Much like the potato we were looking at earlier, the inside of this sphere is starchy and white, and indeed the plant is storing lots of nutrients in this spot. But you can see inside what looks like a little bit of insect droppings. Container here, the cyst, contains, and you can see it on my knife, the grub of the fly. So here's the grub, and you can kind of see it still moving there. This grub belongs to a species of fly whose adult form flies around the field looking for goldenrod to lay its eggs in. And once the egg is laid inside of the stalk of the young goldenrod plant, the plant will start to absorb some hormones that the egg is producing, and a cancerous type growth will appear on the stalk. That's good for this little maggot because the maggot can then live in relative safety. It's protected in its own little capsule from predation from birds and other insects, and so it can grow and consume the flesh that the goldenrod plant is providing in the capsule. Examples of plants that are capable of getting around and moving. They do this in various ways. One is to move their pollen around, as in the example of the goldenrod. Another way is to move the fruit around, in the example of an apple or the thistle fluff. But there's another great example, comes from a plant that's related to impatiens, which is a common flower in your garden. This plant is called, the common name is jewelweed or touch-me-not. And if you see the fruit of the touch-me-not, looks a little bit like a miniature cucumber. And the shape is actually related to its function. This fruit is actually spread mechanically. And, oh, there we go. If you touch the touch-me-not, you'll release its seeds and thereby provide the plant with a service it was looking for. So if I touch any of these fruits, as an animal would walking by and brushing the plant, fruit explodes, and that explosion sends the seeds flying. It's a spring-loaded mechanism, so each of the little modified petals of the flower curl up to produce a spring, and when the spring is released by touch, the seeds inside go flying, thereby spreading the next generation far from its parents and giving it an opportunity to grow on its own as well. And these are actually very tasty seeds. They taste a little bit like almond, so that's really good. It's called jewelweed because the leaves themselves have an adaptation for survival in wet environments, which is that if you place the leaf underwater, it shines like silver or a jewel. The silvery appearance actually comes from a little bit of air that's trapped next to the leaf by hairs that exist microscopically on the surface of the leaf. So the tiny hairs will trap air in the leaf and keep the plant from getting stuck underwater should wind or an animal trample it and push it into the water. You can see when you remove the leaf, it's virtually dry. that allows the plant to continue respirating and breathing for photosynthesis without being bogged down in wet. Whereas if you took the leaf from something like a goldenrod and stuck it underwater, when it comes up it's soaking wet and now it can't breathe.